had proven himself fully a match in protecting the interests of the government for the wily local financiers representing the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China, and other institutions run by experienced men of more or less piratical tendencies. As Governor-General of the islands, his justice, firmness, and courtliness of manner combined to produce an administration in keeping with the dignity of this great office. After returning to the United States, he remained in private life for a time, and was finally given a comparatively unimportant post as minister to a second-class country, Spain, which post he still occupies, in 1912. When, fresh from the memory of the Sailor massacres of 1904, I landed at Seattle at the end of my last homeward-bound journey across the Pacific. In April 1905, one of the natives of Seattle asked me, "Have those people over there ever got quiet yet?" The question itself seemed an answer to the orthodox official attitude at Manila, which had so long been elaborately denying, as to each successive local outbreak, that such outbreak bore any relation to the original insurrection, or was anywise illustrative of the general state of public feeling in the islands. At the time the question was asked, the answer was, not entirely, not until toward the end of 1903 a correct answer to the question. Ow. In other words, there were no more serious outbreaks after 1906, nor was a state of general and complete peace ever finally established until then. Since 1906 there have been occasional dispatches from Manila recounting small episodes of bloodshed, several of which have had quite a martial ring. These have related merely to the country of the Mohammedan Moros, who are as wholly apart from the main problem as the American Indian today is from our tariff and other like questions. The Moros are indeed what Kipling calls half savage and half child. They never did have anything more to do with the Filipino insurrection against us than the American Indian had to do with the Civil War. Chapter XXI. Governor Smith, 1907-9. Oh, but honey, this rabbit just bleached her climb this tree. Uncle Remus. On September 20th, 1906, says the report of the Philippine Commission for 1907, 468, the resignation of the Hun, Henry Clay as Governor-General became effective, and on that date the Hun, James F. Smith was inaugurated as Governor-General of the Philippine Islands. The year 1907 will be known most prominently to the future history of our far eastern possession as the year of the opening of the Philippine Assembly, which momentous event occurred on October 16th, but in the departments both of politics and psychology it should be known as a year of the Great Certificate. The Great Certificate was a certificate signed by certain eminent gentlemen on March 28, 1907, which made the preposterous affirmation that a condition of general and complete peace had prevailed throughout the archipelago, except among the non-Christian tribes, for the 2 years immediately preceding, taken in its historic setting. That certificate can by no possibility escape responsibility as accessory after the fact, at least, to the pretense that a similar condition had prevailed ever since President Roosevelt's final war whoop of July 4, 1902, published to the American troops in the islands on the day named. That war whoop, it will be remembered, was in the form of a presidential proclamation congratulating General Chaffee and the gallant officers and men under his command on some
it's the stand over here.
Great and small,
Please don't
and declaring, in effect, that benevolent assimilation was at last triumphantly vindicated, and that opposition to American rule was at an end. The certificate of March 28, 1907 appears at pages 47-8 of the report of the Philippine Commission for 1907, Part 1. If we consider what is now called modern, the island of modern history, and the date of the early fighting as ancient history, this certificate will serve as the connecting link between the two. It furnishes the keynote to all that had happened during the American occupation prior to 1907, and the keynote of all that has happened since. Therefore, though somewhat long, it is deemed indispensable to clearness to submit to your full the text of the Great Certificate of 1907.
What's this?
Whereas the census of the Philippine Islands was completed and published on the 27th day of March, 1905, which said completion and publication of the census was on the 28th day of March, 1905, duly published and proclaimed to the people by the Governor General of the Philippine Islands with the announcement that the President of the United States would direct the Philippine Commission to call a general election for the choice of delegates to a popular assembly, provided that the condition of general and complete peace, with recognition of the authority of the United States tribunals, certified by the Philippine Commission to have continued on the territory of the Philippine Islands for a period of 2 years
All right.
after said completion and publication of said census. And whereas since the completion and publication of said census there have been no serious disturbances of the public order save and except those caused by the noted outlaws and bandit chieftains, Felizardo and Montalban, and their followers in the provinces of Cavite and Batangas, and those caused in the provinces of Samar, and late by the non-Christian and fanatical Palaihans resident in the mountain district of the said provinces of Malaya, Kankakee thereto. And whereas the overwhelming majority of the people of said provinces of Cavite, Batangas, Samar, and late have not taken part in said disturbances and have not aided or abetted the lawless acts of said bandits and Palaihans. And whereas the great mass and body of the Filipino people have, during said period of 2 years, continued to be law-abiding, faithful, and loyal to the United States, and have continued to recognize and do now recognize the authority and sovereignty of the United States in the territory of said Philippine Islands, now, therefore, we resolved that the Philippine Commission in full session assembled, that it, said Philippine Commission, do certify, and it, does hereby certify to the President of the United States that for a period of 2 years after the completion and publication of the census of conditions of general and complete peace, with recognition of the authority of the United States, has continued to exist, and now exists in the territory of said Philippine Islands not inhabited by Moros or other non-Christian tribes. And be it further resolved by said Philippine Commission that the President of the United States be requested, and is hereby requested, to direct said Philippine Commission to call a general election for the choice of delegates to a popular assembly of the people of said territory in the Philippine Islands, which assembly shall be known as the Philippine Assembly. Let us examine these amiable liberties thus taken with the facts of history by men of irreproachable private character, briefly analyzing their action. Such an examination and analysis are indispensable to a clear understanding by a great free people whose proudest boast is love of fair play, of whether the Filipino people, or any appreciable fraction of them, have ever in the least consented, or do now in the least consent, to a rule, as the small minority in them has insisted, in keeping the islands, has systematically sought, all these years, to have its nation believe, as the above certificate of 1907 was the last hurdle that benevolent assimilation had to meet on the benevolent hypocrisy course over which we had to gallop in order to get from the boom of Cuba to the subjugation of the Philippines.
It's my own guy.
My morning of the first day or two, left, when a law, doubtful from the Philippine settled. Judge Abbott said on November 30th, 1900. A great majority of the people long for peace and are entirely willing to accept the establishment of the government under the supremacy of the United States 469. And, pursuant to the idea, he acted as the civil government on July 4th, 1901. He never did thereafter admit that he was mistaken in his original theory, but kept on trying to fit the facts to his theory, hoping that after a while they would fit. He clung to his policy of disinterested benevolence with a tenacity born of conviction, to follow a phrase from Governor General Smith's inaugural address of 1907, but in the same inaugural address of Governor Smith of 1907, you find, for the first time in all the Philippine state figures, a frank admission of the actual conditions under which the government of 1901 was in fact set up, says he. While the smoke of battle still hung over the hills and valleys of the Philippines, and every town and barrio in the islands was smoking at rebellion, the United States States replaced the military with a civil regime, and on the
17.
smoldering embers of insurrection planted civil government. 470. That confession, maybe the
19.
bluntness of a most gallant soldier, is as refreshing in its honesty as the Roosevelt war whoop of 1902. There shall be no tiresome repetition here concerning the original withholding of the facts from the American people in 1898 September, but to place in juxtaposition Secretary of War Root's representations to the American public in the year last named, and the actual facts, as stated earlier in the same year by General MacArthur, one of our best fighting generals, during the thick of the early fighting, in an interview already noticed. In its proper chronological place, will forever fix the genesis of the original lack of frankness as to conditions in the Philippines, which has naturally and inexorably made frankness as to those conditions impossible ever since, as late as October 7, 1899, M.R. Root, who had not then and has not since been in the Philippines, had said in Chicago, in a speech at a dinner of the Marquette Club. Well, against whom are we fighting? Are we fighting the Philippine nation? No, there is none. There are hundreds of islands, inhabited by more than 60 tribes, speaking more than 60 different languages, and all but one are ready to accept American sovereignty. As early as the beginning of April 1899, just after the taking on, March 31st of the first insurgents' capital, Maryland, General MacArthur, who commanded our troops in the Southern as great, had said, in an interview with a newspaper man afterwards verified by the general, before the Senate Committee of 1902 as substantially correct. When I first started in against these rebels, I believed that, after all those troops represented only a faction, I did not like to believe that the whole population of Luzon was opposed to us. But after having come thus far, and having been brought much in contact with both insurrectos and amigos, 471, I have been reluctantly compelled to believe that the Filipino masses are loyal to Aguinaldo and the government which he runs. 472. The presidential election of 1900 had been fought out in the midst of considerable bitterness on the idea that the Root view was correct, and the MacArthur view was altogether mistaken, so that after 1900, the McKinley administration was irrevocably committed to the Root view. 473. The Philippine government had, after 1900, diligently tried to work to live up to the Root view, and to put the facts to the Root view by prayer and toast, accompanied by asseveration, hence in 1901 the alleged joy loss of welcome with which the Filipino people are, in effect, described in the report of the Philippine Commission for that year as having received the benign civil government, said Fox, or other manifestations having spread, if the Commission's report is to be taken at its face value, like wildfire, hence also the attempt of 1902 to minimize the insurrection of 1901-2 in Batangas and other provinces of southern Luzon, conducted by what Governor Lucky Wright, in a speech delivered at Memphis in the latter part of 1902, called the Dying the Last-Ditch Contingent, hence the quiet placing of the province of Surigao in the hands of the military in 1903 without suspension under the habeas corpus, and authority to order out the army in Albay in 1903 and in Samar in 1904, hence also the prompt use of the army in Samar, Batangas, and Cavite in 1905, after the presidential election was taken over, and also receiving state expedition with smoldering by Fine Islands in 1906, punctuated by the outbreak in May of that year. The Sacramento purposes by which the distinguished gentleman, who signed the Great Certificate of March 28, 1907, was their own consent to sign it, make the most profoundly interesting study relatively to the general welfare of the world in our Philippine experiments so far. They are the highest political expediency. They are the weeds of benevolent casuistry that become from time to time unavoidable in a colonial guard intended by a republic, based on the consent of the government and therefore by the law of its own life unfitted to run any other kind of the government. Frankly,
No!
these processes find their origin in the provisions of the Act of Congress of July 1st, 1902, known as the Philippine Government Act. 3 days after President Roosevelt approved the act, he issued his proclamation of July 4th, 1902, about the noticed declaring the insurrection at an
Dirty
end.
trick. Oh, what is this guy?
That act provided
Meserac
whenever the
16.
existing
For God's
insurrection
sake.
in the Philippine Islands shall have ceased, and the condition of general
so much
and
for your
complete
Meserac
peace shall
16.
have been established therein, and the fact shall be certified to the President by the Philippine Commission. The President, upon being satisfied thereof, shall order a census of the Philippine Islands to be taken by said Philippine Commission. This census was intended to be preliminary to granting the Filipinos a legislature of their own, but as a legislature full of insurrectos would of course still divide American sponsors before all mankind, it was announced in effect, in publishing the census program, that no legislature would be forthcoming if the Filipinos did not quit insurrecting and remain good for 2 years. If they did remain good for 2 years after the census was finished, then they should have their legislature during the lull of general and complete peace, which, in the fall of 1902, followed the suppression of the Batangas insurrection of 1901-2 and preceded the Ola insurrection of 1902-3 in southern provinces of southern Luzon. The Commission made, on September 25, 1902, the certificate contemplated by the above Act of Congress, and the taking of the census was accordingly ordered by the President of the United States, M.R. Roosevelt, by a proclamation issued the same day. 474, Section 7 of the aforesaid Act of Congress provided. 2 years after the completion and publication of the census, in such condition of general and complete peace recognition of the authority of the United States shall have continued in the territory of said islands not inhabited by Moros or other non-Christian tribes, and such facts shall have been certified to the President by the Philippine Commission. The President, upon being satisfied thereof, shall direct said Commission to call, and the Commission shall call the general election of the choice of delegates to a popular assembly of the people of said territory in the Philippine Islands, which
So the enemy
shall be known
spawn
as
point.
a Philippine Assembly. On March
That's a
27, 1905, the President of the United States was duly advised that the census had been completed, and on March 28, the presidential proclamation promising the Filipinos a legislature. 2 years later, if in the meantime they did not insurrect any,
Nope.
was published the census. It is true that there is no Philippine state paper signed by anybody either by the President of the United States or the government of the Philippines or anyone else certified to the condition of general and complete peace between the certificate to that effect made by the Philippine Commission on September 26, 1902, above mentioned, which authorized commencing the census, and was justified by the facts and the presidential promise of March 28, 1905, that if they would be good for 2 years more, they should have a legislature. But the whole manifest implication of the representation of the South ought to be conveyed by the action, both of the Washington and the New York authorities after the presidential promise of March 28, 1905, is that a condition of general and complete peace had obtained. Ever since the last certificate to that effect, the certificate of September 25, 1902, yet, as we saw in the chapter covering the last year of Governor Wright's administration, besides the semi-disturbances that lasted all through 1905, a big insurrection was actually in full swing in Quezon, Batangas, and Laguna provinces on March 28, 1905, having been in progress since before the first of the year, and continued until the latter part of 1905, the then Governor General, Governor Wright, having, by proclamation, issued January 31, 1905, declared Quezon and Canada to be a state of insurrection, ordered the military into those provinces, and suspended the writ of habeas corpus. President Roosevelt's proclamation of March 28, 1905, can by no possibility be construed as saying to the Filipinos anything other than substantially this: you have not insurrected any since my proclamation of July 4, 1902. If you will be good 2 years more, you shall have a legislature. What then was the Philippine Commission to do at the end of those 2 years, peppered as they had been with most annoying outbreaks in various provinces, not inhabited by Moors or other non-Christian tribes? During the presidential campaign of 1904, the Commission had committed themselves as we have seen, to the proposition that nothing serious was going on at that time in Semel. So how could they take back official cognizance on paper of the reign of terror left loose there by their delay in ordering out the army until after the presidential election? A delay, like a delay of fire engines to arrive at the scene of a fire, had to the samurai was to gain such headway that it took 2 years to finally put it down. Then there was the outbreak of 1906 in late, described in the last chapter, as to which even the Commission had admitted in their annual report to 475. Possibly its lakes, immediate vicinity to Samar has had to do with the disturbed conditions. In other words, possibly, a fire may spread from one stretch of grass to another nearby. As to the Cavite Batangas Laguna insurrection of 1905, in an executive order dated September 28, 1907, 476, noticed in a previous chapter, but to certain entity involved here, where I said the reasons for withholding executive clemency from the condemned leaders of that movement, Governor Smith describes in harrowing terms a reign of terror, devastation, and
hills over here.
of the most beautiful provinces in the archipelago, wrought by the condemned men, who he says assumed the cloak of patriotism and undergone titles of defenders of the country and protectors of the people, proceeded to inaugurate said reign of terror. These men were most of them former insurgent officers who had remained out after that. Respectable generals had all surrendered. This Cavite Batangas Laguna insurrection was the first to distinguish the conditional promise of a legislature made by Congress to the Filipino people in Section 6 and 7 of the Act of July 1st, 1902. The Philippine Government Act had stipulated should not happen. This is no mere dictum of my own. In the case of Barcelona against Baker, 517 reports. pp. 87 as Sec already very briefly noticed in the previous chapter, the Supreme Court of the Islands had, in fact, so held. Section 5 of the Act of Congress of July 1st, 1902, had provided that if any state of affairs serious enough should arise, the governor of the state should have authority to suspend the reign of habeas corpus when in cases of rebellion, insurrection, or invasion the public safety may require it. Section 6 and 7 of the same Act had provided, on the other hand, that if the condition of general continued, for a stated period the Filipinos should have a legislature. In the case of Barcelona against Baker, the Supreme Court held that the situation contemplated by Section 5 of the Act of Congress had arisen in the provinces of Cavite and Batangas, that, of course, automatically, so to speak, made the postponement of the Philippine Assembly a necessary, logical sequence. Under the provisions of Section 6 and 7, these Sections 6 and 7 promised the Filipinos a legislature in the event the conditions contemplated by Section 5 should not arise. Barcelona, who was one of the non-combatant reconcentrados restrained of his liberty at Batangas, claimed that his detention as such reconcentrado by the defendant in the habeas corpus proceeding, the constabulary officer, Colonel Baker, was unlawful, in that, he being shot, no crime, such detention deprived him of his liberty without due process of law. The Philippine Commission, however, had declared, by virtue of the authority vested in it by Section 5 of the Act of Congress aforesaid, that a state of insurrection existed in Cavite, Batangas, and accordingly the Governor General had suspended the writ of habeas corpus and declared martial law. In those provinces, the Attorney General representing the Philippine Commission before the court rested the government's case on the proposition that the petitioner was not entitled to claim the ordinary due process of law because open insurrection against the constituted authorities existed in the provinces named, and the Supreme Court upheld its contention. In so holding, they say, among other things, page 93, in construing Section 5 of the Act of Congress we are considering, inasmuch as the President or Governor General with the approval of the Philippine Commission can suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus only under the conditions mentioned in the said statute. It becomes their duty to make an investigation of the existing conditions in the archipelago
it's
or any
beef
part thereof
velvet.
to ascertain whether there actually exists a state of rebellion, insurrection, or invasion,
Save
and
my
that the public
shells.
safety requires the suspension of the privilege of
Got
the
the
writ of habeas
enjoyment of
corpus.
watching the
When
spectators back
this
and forth.
investigation is concluded, and the President or the Governor General with the consent of the Philippine Commission
Wow, nice
declares
little
that there
heel
exist
field
these
there.
conditions
Sorry about those
and
little
that the
missiles
public
I had.
safety requires the suspension of the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. Can the judicial department of the government investigate the same facts and declare that no such conditions exist? The answer no. The Hellenic decision is as follows.
Suck.
The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus may be suspended in the Philippine Islands in case of rebellion, when public safety requires it, by the President of the United States, or by the Governor General of the Philippine Islands with the approval of the Philippine Commission.
You're on a
Thus, the
highway and
Supreme
we're
Court
gonna
of the
go beep
islands
beep.
squarely held that on the 4th day of August, 1905,
When
the day the
we're
writ
on
of
it, we
habeas
can blow
corpus
him down.
was made returnable. Open insurrection existed against the constituted
Y'all
authorities in the
lobbing all the
island.
way back
In
over
the
here. I
province's
just got in the
name,
game.
and had
man.
existed since the executive proclamation of January 31st, previous, declaring the state of insurrection, and on that ground and
Oh.
the writ, yet the Commission
Writ.
certified on March 28, 1907, that a state of general and complete peace as contemplated by the Act of Congress, conditionally on the legislature, had prevailed for the 2 years preceding. In other words, the Philippine Commission declared a state of insurrection to exist in certain populous provinces, and was upheld by the Supreme Court of the islands in so doing, and later certified to the continuance of a state of general and complete peace, covering the same period. All the uncandid things, uncandid and failure to take the American people into their country, that have been done by all
Chairman.
the good men we have sent to the Philippines from the beginning, have been justified by those good men to their own consciences on the idea that, because the ending view was truly benevolent, therefore the unjustified that means, as a matter of fact, American benevolent assimilation in the Philippines as, in its practical operation, was more of misery and havoc. First the war, and since the legislation could have gone, the statute books by the
Turkey.
influence of special interests in the United States with Congress, and any which has darkened their unhappy past, to use one of McKinley's early expressions deprecating doing for the Philippines what we did for Cuba, 477. But let us see just how much the Philippine Commission had signed the Peace Certificate of March 28, 1907, and how they followed it. It will be observed that they
I got the
sugar-coated their
freeze
certificate
round
with
behind
a lot of
hell.
whereases. The first of these recites President Roosevelt's promise of March 28, 1905, that the Filipinos should have a legislature. 2 years thereafter provided that a condition of general and complete peace with recognition of the authority of the United States should be certified by the Philippine Commission to have continued in the territory of the Philippine Islands for 32 years after the proclamation, whereas number 2, it will be noted, thus, on the state that there have been no serious disturbances of public order serving exposed in Cuba, Batangas, Samar, and late 478, the magnitude of which has been fully described in previous chapters, by which they at the time of insurrection, the only one they had previously formally admitted to be insurrection, they say it was caused by certain noted outlaws and bandit chieftains naming them, and their followers, obviously this was hardly sufficient to show that an insurrection they had once officially recognized as such was not in fact such at all. So in order to justify statement that a condition of general and complete peace had continued in these 2 great provinces of Cavite and Batangas, which they had but shortly previously declared to be in a state of insurrection, and upheld by the Supreme Court in so doing, they resort to the old Otis expedient of 1898-9, worked on the American people through M.R. McKinley to show absence of lack of consent of the governed. This expedient as we have seen in
It
similar
really
chapters
pisses
of
me
this book,
off.
consisted in vague use of the word majority. It has to judge tapped in Big said in the campaign of 1900, because when he then said that the great majority of the people were entirely willing to accept American rule, there was no earthly way to disprove it in time for the verdict of the American people to be influenced by the unanimity of the Filipinos against a change of masters in name of independence. It was the only possible expedient for American conscience, because every American naturally feels that a Muslim can, by some sort of sophistry, persuade himself that the majority of the people want a given thing, then the thing is a wrong thing to force upon them. So the ethical hurdle the Commission had to leap in order to sign the Certificate of 1907 was clear thus. The overwhelming majority of the people of said provinces have not taken part in said disturbances and have not aided and abetted the lawless acts of said bandits. As a matter of fact, the report of the American governor of Cavite and conditions were conceded to be identical in the two provinces of Cavite and Batangas, shows that the reason it was so hard to suppress the Cavite-Batangas troubles of 1905 was that the people would not help the authorities to apprehend the outlaws. No doubt the King of England would have signed a similar certificate as to the people of the shires and counties in which Robin Hood, Little John, and Friar Tuck held high carnival. Of course I do not mean to libel the fair fame of that fine freebooter Robin Hood and his companions by placing the rascally leaders of the bands of outlaws now under consideration in the same jolly and respectable class with those beloved friends of the childhood of us all. But the Cavite-Batangas patriots of 1905 could never have given the authorities as much trouble as they did it. The people have not at least taken secret joy in this discomfiture of the American authorities until finally suppressed all such movements, as these always grew exactly as a snowball does if you roll it on snow, says Governor Shanks, a major of the 4th United States Infantry, who was governor of Cavite in 1905 in his report for that year, 479, in explaining the uprising under consideration, and the way it grew. The Filipino likes to be on the winning side. Certainly this is not peculiar to the Filipino. Governor Shanks proceeds. The prestige acquired by the uprising at San Pedro Tulisan, Parañaque, Taal, and San Francisco de Malayban at great within, creating active sympathy for the drone bands and leaders. Something was needed to counterbalance the effect of the combined successes, and the appearance of regular troops was just the thing needed. This explains how the overwhelming majority of which the certificate of 1907 speaks was obtained in Cavite, which occurred once to obtain that majority of what, I suppose the campaigning of the American regulars might be credited with obtaining the majority, and a great concentration of brother business of its constabulary might be afforded the additional credit of making the majority overwhelming. As election shows, so to speak, a soldier with a bayonet on one side, and a constabulary officer with a concentration camp back of him on the other. You can get an overwhelming majority for the continuance of American rule even in Cavite province. Through men I commanded during the early campaigning, I have killed my share of Filipinos in the Philippines. And after the civil government was set up, I had occasion to kill a good many of them, under what seemed to me a necessary application of the old Mosaic law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life. But I thank God I have never been a party to the insufferable pretense that they, or any appreciable fraction of them, ever consented to our rule. This, however, is the whole theory of the Philippine Commission Certificate of March 28, 1907. It is curious how generously and securely planned a brave soldier will get when he forgets to be a politician. In Mona, his state papers of 1907, Governor General Smith 480 speaks of General Trias, who had been Lieutenant General of the insurgent army in the days of the insurrection, and next to Monte Aguinaldo himself, as one whose love of country had been tested on many well-fought fields of honorable conflict, contrasted tribute to the respectability of the original Philippine War for Independence against us with a long list of stale falsehoods already reviewed in this volume, on the faith of which In the presidential campaign of 1900, the American people were persuaded that to deny to the Filipinos what they had, according to Tito was righteous. The leaders of the K-5 Battalion, uprising of 1905 had been officers of the insurgent army, and that was secretly called upon the people of those provinces. It is true that they must have been pretty sorry officers, and
That's robot.
that they were ladrones, brigands. They were cruel and unmitigated scoundrels, working for purely selfish and inglorious ends. But it was the
Stupid
cloak
turkey.
of patriotism, however, infamously misused, that gained them
You need to go on. Leave me alone.
1905, says the American governor of K5 province in his annual
Still
report
didn't
for
tell him.
1906. 481. The province should be most carefully watched. I am convinced that ladrone leaders do not produce conditions, but that the conditions and attitude of the public produce ladrones. So much for the K5 Battalion hurdle, and now for the Samar and later. The signers of the certificate of 1907 justify their certificate as to Samar and late on a very ingenious theory, the Act of Congress of July 1, 1902, already cited, which had provided for the taking of a census, preliminary to the call of an election for delegates to a legislature, had recognized the crude ethnological status of the Moros and other non-Christian tribes. These had never had anything whatever to do with the insurrection against us. Therefore, in making the continuance of a state of general and complete peace for a prescribed period, condition precedent to granting the Filipinos a legislature, the Act of 1902 had limited that condition precedent to the territory of said islands not inhabited by Moros or other non-Christian tribes. In fact, President Roosevelt's proclamation of September 25, 1902, already noticed, ordering the taking of the census on the theory that a state of general and complete peace then existed, explains that this theory is entirely consistent with trouble among the Moros and other non-Christian tribes because they, it says, quoting from a statement of the Philippine Commission previously made to the President, never have taken any part in the insurrection. The Moros and other non-Christian tribes were, so to speak, in no sense assets of the Philippine insurrection. All the rest of the population was, that is, if there was anything in the veteran General MacArthur's grim jest of 1900, prompted by Governor Taft's half-baked opinion to the contrary, that ethnological homogeneity was a secret of the unanimity of the opposition we met, and that somehow people will stick to their own kith and kin. When the Philippine Government Act of 1902 was drawn, nobody pretended for a moment that there were any non-Christian tribes, either in Samar or Leyte. The whole population of those islands were valuable assets of the insurrection. If anyone doubts it, let him ask the 9th Infantry. You will find in the census of 1903 that there are no non-Christian tribes credited either to Samar or Leyte. 482. When the Philippine Government Act of 1902 was drafted, the exception about Moros and other non-Christian tribes was intended to accept merely certain types of people as distinct from the great mass of the Philippine population as islands are from the sea. The fact is, no person connected with the Philippine government either before or after the certificate under consideration ever thought of classifying the ignorant country people of the uplands and hills of Samar or Leyte as non-Christian tribes. The Philippine census of 1903 does not so classify them. The very volume of the report of the Philippine Commission for 1907 in which the certificate aforesaid appears, does not. In that volume, 483, the report of the Executive Secretary deals elaborately with the subject of non-Christian tribes. Professor Worcester of the Philippine Commission has for the last 12 years been the grand official figure of non-Christian tribes. He takes as much delight at the discovery of a new non-Christian tribe in some remote, newly penetrated mountain fastness as the butterfly catcher with the proverbial blue goggles does in the capture of a new kind of butterfly. The Executive Secretary's report, out of deference to the professor, omits no single achievement of his with reference to his anthropological hobby. It treats with an enthusiasm that would delight MRS Jellyby herself of the progress that was made during the fiscal year in the work of civilizing non-Christian tribes scattered throughout the archipelago. It gives an alphabetical list of all the provinces where there are non-Christian tribes, and Under the name of each province it gives notes as to the progress during the year with those tribes. Neither Samar nor Lud appear in that list of provinces, so that the Samar, Pelagians, or Red Breeches fellows, fanatical Pelagians, they are called in the certificate, were non-Christian tribes for peace, certificate purposes only. One thing which makes it most difficult of all for me to understand how these gentlemen got their consent to sign that certificate is that each non-Christian tribe in the Philippines has a language of its own, whereas the country people of the uplands and mountains of Samar and Leyte or libeled non-Christian tribes in the certificate of 1907 were no more different from the rest of the population of those islands than, for instance, the ignorant people of Virginia or Kentucky are different ethnologically from the inhabitants of Richmond or Louisville, Indiana. His report for 1908. 484, Governor General Smith himself makes this perfectly clear, where he describes the Samar, Pelagian, or mountaineer, thus: the Pelagian is not a robber or thief by nature, quite the contrary. He is hardworking, industrious, and even frugal. He, at his little lake 485, up on the side of the mountain, and breaking out his little 486, a tent, he carried it out high, and come out and miles over almost impassable mountain trails to the nearest town or barrio. There he offered it for sale, and if he refused the price tendered, which was generally not more than half the value, he soon found himself arrested on a trumped-up charge, and unless he compromised by parting with his hemp, he found himself, after paying his fine and lawyer fees, without either hemp or money. The non-Christian tribe, on the other hand, never had anything to do with civilized people. The Act of Congress of 1902, therefore,
I'm dreaming of a white Scots's dream.
and ordinarily, docile mountain folk who tilled the soil, revered the priests, and their seasonal or had touched off all the rest of the population of the islands, and carried their agricultural products from season to season, their hemp and the like, to the coast towns to market. In other words, inclusion of the Samar Pelagians, or Red Breeches Brigade, and the Blade Bandits, in the peace certificate of 1907, as non-Christian tribes was an afterthought, having no foundation either in logic or fact. It was a part of benevolent assimilation. This is clearly apparent from President Roosevelt's message to Congress of December 1905, 487. You do not find any bunkum about non-Christian tribes in that message. In the reviewing the Samar and other insurrections of 1905 in the Philippines, you find him dealing with the real root of the evil with perfect honesty, though adopting the view that the Filipino people were to blame therefore, because we had placed too much power in the hands of an ignorant electorate, which had elected rascally officials, who by Samar, he says, are instances of reposing too much confidence in the self-governing power of a people. If we had let the Filipinos go and prepare Little Republic in 1898, instead of destroying it as we did,
Come on down
they
here, bro.
knew and would have utilized the true elements of strength they had, with a very considerable body of educated, patriotic men of the layered confidence of the masses of the people, but we proceeded to ram down their throats a preconceived theory that the only road to self-government was for an alien people to step in and make the ignorant masses the sine qua non. Yet if there was one point on which M.R. McKinley had laid more stress than on any other, in his original instructions of April 7, 1900, to the Taft Commission, that point was the one consecrated in the following language of those instructions. In all the forms of government and administrative provisions which they are authorized to prescribe, the Commission should bear in mind that the government which they are establishing is designed not for the expression of our theoretical views, etc. Of course, the ignorant electorate we perpetrated on Samar's an expression of our theoretical views proved that we had gone too fast in conferring self-government, or, to quote M.R. Roosevelt, had been reposing too much confidence in the self-governing power of a people, if to begin with the rankest material for constructing a government that there was a canvas to offer a fair test of capacity for self-government. But President Roosevelt's message, above quoted, shows you that the ignorant electorate was merely an ignorant electorate, and not a non-Christian tribe, as the Philippine Commission leader had temerity to certify they were. Now the plain, unvarnished, benevolent truth is just this. The Commission knew that nobody in the United States, whether they were for retaining the islands or against retaining them, had any desire to postpone granting a legislature to the Philippine people, so in their certificate they simply included everybody who had given trouble in Samar and Leyte as non-Christian tribes. The only justification for this was that they had in fact acted in a most unchristian-like manner, i.e. for people who devotedly made prayers to patron saints in good standing in the church calendar. In making their certificate, the Commission simply ignored the various uprisings of the preceding 2 years. They simply said, generously, oh, forget it. They knew nobody in the United States begrudged the Filipinos their conditionally promised legislature, or cared to postpone it. The leading Filipinos begged the authorities to forget the various disturbances that had occurred since the publication of the census, and there was a very general desire in the islands to let bygones be bygones, wipe the slate, and begin again. Any other attitude would have meant that the legislature would have to be postponed. Then, the opposition in the United States would want to know why, and by 1908 Philippine independence might become an issue again. In the eyes of the Commission, the end, being benevolent, justified stretching the language of the Act of 1902 as if it had been the blessed veil of charity itself, i.e. the end justified the means. In fact it did, almost, justify the means, but not quite. The moral quality of the Great Certificate of 1907 was not as reprehensible as General Anderson's dealings with Aguinaldo, already described, which, like the certificate, were a necessary part of the benevolent hypocrisy of benevolent assimilation of an unconsenting people. Yet General Anderson is an honorable man. It was not as bad as General Greene's juggling Aguinaldo out of his trenches before Manila in a friendly way, and failing to give them a receipt for said trenches, as he had promised to do, because such a receipt would show cooperation and might look too much like an alliance. This also was done on the idea that the end justified the means. Yet General Greene is an honorable man. The signers of the Great Peace Certificate of 1907 are all honorable men, but they signed that certificate just the same. Judged not that ye be not judged. All I have to say is, I would not have signed that certificate. I would have said, no, gentlemen, the end does not justify the means. The Philippine Assembly must be postponed. If we are going to deal frankly with Congress and the folks at home, the conditions Congress made precedent to the grant of an assembly have not been met, and we each and all of us know it. We owe more to our own country and to truth than we do to the Filipinos. The Act of Congress of 1902 did not vest in the Philippine Commission authority to pardon disturbances of public order. It imposed upon the Commission an implied duty to report such disturbances fully, and frankly, it is not true that there has been a continuing state of general and complete peace in these islands for the last 2 years, and I for one will not certify that there has been. The truth is, the attitude of the signers of the certificate was like that of Uncle Remus, when interrupted by the little boy in one of his stories. When Uncle Remus gets to the point in the rabbit story where the rabbit thrillingly escapes from the jaws of death, i.e. from the jaws of the dogs, by climbing a tree, the rabbit listener interrupts, "Why, Uncle Remus, a rabbit can't climb a tree," to which Uncle Remus replies, with a reassuring wave of the hand, "Oh, but honey, this rabbit just bleached her climb this tree." Should any of my good friends still in the Philippines feel disposed to censure such levity as the above, I can only say, as Kipling writes, from England to his Anglo-Indian friends in a foreword to one of his books, I have told these tales of our life, for a sheltered people's mirth, in jesting guise, but ye are wise, and ye know what the jest is worth. Moreover, my authority to speak frankly about these matters is also aptly stated by the same great poet thus: I have eaten your bread and salt, I have drunk your water and wine, the deaths ye died I have watched beside, and the lives that ye led were mine. Was there aught that I did not share, in vigil or toil or ease, one joy or woe that I did not know, dear friends across the seas? The above reflections are not placed before the reader to show him what a pity it is that the writer was not a member of the Philippine Commission at the time of their certificate of 1907, or to show what a fine thing for our common country it would be if he were made a member of that commission now. He is, personally, as disinterested as if Manila were in the moon, for he cannot live in the tropics anymore. The effect of a year or so of residence there upon white men invited home for tropical dysentery and then returning to the islands is like the effect of water upon a starched shirt. However, it is believed that the facts of official record collected in this chapter up to this point are a demonstration of this proposition, to wit, what the Philippine government needs more than anything else is that the minority party in the United States should be represented on the commission. By this I do not mean representation by what are called, under Republican administrations, White House Democrats, nor what under a Democratic administration, if one should ever occur, would probably be called Copperheads. Republicans, I mean the genuine article. A Democrat who has cast his fortunes with the Philippines is no longer a Democrat relatively to the Philippines, because the Democratic Party wants to get rid of the Philippines and the Democrat in the Philippines of course does not. How absurd it is to talk about former Governor Clarence Hurt as lifelong Democrats, by way of preliminary to using their opinions as admissions. In the law of evidence, an admission is a statement made against the interest of the party making it. The first election for representatives in the Philippine Assembly was held on July 30, 1907, and on October 16 thereafter the Assembly was formally opened by Secretary of War William H. Taft. The various whereas herein above reviewed, importing complete acquiescence in American rule since President Roosevelt's proclamation of July 4, 1902, were first duly read, and then the Assembly was opened. Of course, no man could have been elected to the Assembly without at least pretending to be in favor of independence, and all but a corporals, part of them were outspoken in favor of the proposition. As a present Governor General M.R. Forbes said, while Vice Governor, in the Atlantic Monthly for February 1909, to deny the capacity of one's country for self-government is essentially unpopular. When he visited the Philippines to open their assembly in 1907, M.R. Taft had said nothing definite and final on the question of promising independence since his departure from the islands in 1903, his then benevolent unwillingness to tell them frankly he did not think they had sense enough to run a government of their own, and that they were unfit for self-government, has already been reviewed. 2 years after 1903 Governor Wright had made them pine for the return of M.R. Taft, they longed to hear again some of the siren notes of this celebrated speech, The Philippines for the Filipinos. They had gotten very excited and very happy over that speech. Of course they would not have gotten very excited over independence supposed to be coming long after they should be dead and buried during the too dark, frank years of Governor Wright's regime. They had frequently been told that they were not fit for independence, so that when Secretary of War Taft had visited the islands in 1905 they all had been on the qui vive for more statements vaguely implying an independence they might hope to live to see. During the visit of 1905 the time of the visiting congressional party was consumed principally with tariff hearings, and comparatively little was said on the subject uppermost in the minds of all Filipinos. It is true that M.R. Taft said that he was of the opinion that it would take a generation or longer to get the country ready for self-government, but he said it in a tactful, kindly way, and did not forever crush their hopes. So when he went out to the islands to open the assembly in 1907, the attitude of the whole people in expectation of some definite utterances on the question of a definite promise of independence at some future time was just the attitude of an audience in a theater as to which one affirms you could hear a pin fall. In this regard M.R. Taft's utterances were as follows. 488. I am aware that in view of the issues discussed at the election of this assembly I am expected to say something regarding the policy of the United States toward these islands. I cannot speak with the authority of one who may control that policy. The Philippine Islands are territory belonging to the United States, and by the Constitution the branch of that government vested with the power and charged with the duty of making rules and regulations for their government is Congress. The policy to be pursued with respect to them is therefore ultimately for Congress to determine. I have no authority to speak for Congress in respect to the ultimate disposition of the islands. After that there was some talk about mutually beneficial trade relations and improvement of the people both industrially and in self-governing capacity, but with regard to the process of political preparation of the Filipino people for self-government, the Secretary said that was a question no one could certainly answer. And so far as he was concerned, he thought it would take considerable longer than a generation. Somewhere in the early Philippine state papers there is a quotation used by M.R. Taft from Shakespeare about keeping the word of promise to the ear and breaking it to the hope. The Filipinos have eagerly read for the last 12 years every utterance of M.R. Taft's that they could get hold of, if any of those embryonic statesmen of the First Philippine Assembly, familiar with the various Taft utterances, had looked up the context of the Shakespearean quotation above alluded to, he would have found it to be as follows. And be these juggling themes no more ballyavad, that palter with us in a double sense, that keep the word of promise to our ear, and break it to our hope. 489. Since the announcement by Secretary of War Taft at the opening of the Philippine Assembly in October 1907, of the policy of indefinite retention of the islands with undeclared intention, the Filipinos have of course clearly understood that if they were ever to have independence they must look to Congress for it, but they know Congress is not interested in them and that they have no influence with it, and that the Hemp Trust, the Tobacco Trust, and the Sugar Trust have. So that since 1907, both the American authorities in the Philippines and the Filipinos have settled down, the former suffused with benevolence, hardened however by paternalistic firmness, the latter stoically, to the program of indefinite retention with undeclared intention. No conceivable program could be devised more ingeniously calculated to engender race hatred. The Filipino newspapers call the present policy one of permanent administration for inferior and incapable races. The Act of Congress of July 1, 1902, known as a Philippine Government Act, which is the Constitution, so to speak, we have given the Filipinos, accords liberty of the press in the exact language of our own Constitution. The native press does not fail to use this liberty to the limit. Naturally the American press does not remain silent, so here are a pair of bellows ever fanning the charcoals of discontent, and the masses of the Filipino people read the Filipino papers. If they cannot read, their children can. In one of the reports of one of the American constabulary officials in the Philippines, there is an account of the influence of the native press too graphic to be otherwise inaccurate. He says one can often see, in the country districts, a group of natives gathered about some village Hampton, listening to his reading the latest diatribe against the American occupation. Never was there such folly in the annals of statesmanship. In their native papers, the race situation of course comes in for much comment. Now the most notorious and inflexible fact of that race situation is that the colonial Anglo-Saxon does not intermarry with the yellow and brown subject people, as a Latin colonizing race do. It would be an overstatement of the case to say that the Filipinos today had rather have the Spaniards back as their overlords instead of us. In 1898, they tasted the sweets of liberty, to use an expression of one of their leaders, and I am perfectly sure that today the desire of all those people for a government of their own is so genuine and universal that it amounts to a very hopeful positive factor in the equation of their capacity for self-government. But there is no doubt that many of the Filipinos, after all, have a very warm place in their hearts for the Spanish people. How could it be otherwise when so many of the Filipinos are sons and grandsons of Spaniards? Much of life in this life in life's journey is determined prenatally. On the other hand, the American women in the Philippines maintain an attitude toward the natives quite like that of their British sisters in Hong Kong toward the Chinese, and in Calcutta toward the native there. The social status of an American woman who marries a native. I myself have never heard of but one case, if I, that of a Pacific Coast girl who married a Jap. This is merely the instinct of self-defense with which nature provides the weaker sex, just as she provides the porcupine with quills, but look at the other side of the picture. When an American man marries a native woman, he thereafter finds himself more in touch with his native in-laws. It is true, but correspondingly, and ever increasingly, out of touch with his former associations. This is not a victory thing, but it is a most unpleasant and inevitable fact of the present situation. In an address delivered at the Quill Club in Manila on January 25, 1909, Governor Smith, after reciting the various beneficent designs contemplated by the government and the various public, which culminated at the expense of the people of the island, deplored, in spite of it all, what he termed the growing gulf between the rich and the era of ill feeling has started between Americans and Filipinos, and, I hesitate to say it, race hatred. Church as Latham, you find her, on the one hand, in the American woman, whose attitudes have been indicated, and you find her, on the other, in the refined and virtuous native woman, who finds her American husband's relations to his compatriots altered, queered, since his marriage to her, no matter how faithful a wife and mother she may be. This is the unspeakably cruel situation we have forced upon the Filipino people, whom I really learned to respect, and become much attached to before I left the islands, and President Taft knows it, as well as I do, yet he does not take the American people into his confidence. He simply hurries along with the situation, wishing it could get better, but knowing it will get worse. That the situation is a permanent one is clearly shown by all the previous teachings of racial history in A Woman of the West, written in 1889, speaking of the French settlers in the Ohio Valley before 1776, and the cordial social relations of the dominant race with the natives, relations which have always obtained with all Latin races, under like circumstances, M.R. Roosevelt says, Bull, I page 41. They were not turned out by the clear plot which makes a man. I understand any woman to make a correct a woman is wife, though anxious enough to make him concubine. Men of English stock have changed but little in the matter of race, instinct since 1776. If we had a definite policy, declared by Congress, promising independence, the American attitude in the Philippines toward the Filipinos would at once change from the present impossible one to our ordinary natural attitude of courtesy toward all foreigners, regardless of their color. On May 7, 1909, the Honorable James F. Smith took his departure from the Philippine Islands forever and turned over the duties of his office to the Honorable W. Cameron Force, as acting president of the Commission and Governor General, as in the case of Governors Wright and Ide, so in that of Governor Smith. No reason was apparent why the Washington government should have been willing to dispense with the services of the incumbent. This was peculiarly true in the case of General Smith. He was but 50 years of age when he left the islands. In 1909, he has rendered more different kinds of distinguished public service than any American who has ever been in the Philippine Islands, from the time Dewey's guns first thundered out over Manila Bay down to this good hour, going out with the first expedition in 1898 as colonel of the 1st California Regiment. He distinguished himself on more than one battlefield in the early fighting, and in recognition thereof, was made a brigadier general. Subsequent to this he became military governor of the island of Negros, that one of the 6 principal Visayas Islands which gave less trouble during the insurrection and, after than any other, a circumstance doubtless not wholly unrelated to General Smith's wise and tactful administration there. Later on, during the military regime he became collector of customs of the archipelago. The revenues from customs are the principal source of revenue of the Philippine government, and the sums of money handled are enormous. The customs service, moreover, in most countries, and especially in the Philippines, is more subject to the creeping in of graft than any other. General Smith's administration of this post was, in keeping with everything else he did in the islands. When the civil government was founded by Judge Taft in 1901, he was appointed one of the justices of the Supreme Court and filled the duties of that office most creditably. Thence he was promoted to the Philippine Commission, which is, virtually, the cabinet of the Governor General. Still later, he became Vice Governor, and finally Governor, serving as such from September 1906 to May 1909. Any other government on earth that has overseas colonies and recognizes the supreme importance of a maximum of continuity of policy would have kept Governor Smith as long as it could have possibly induced him to stay. Just as the British kept Lord Cromer in Egypt, Governor Smith was succeeded by a young man from Boston who had come out to the islands 4 years before and who, prior to that time, had never had any public service in the United States of any kind, had never been in the Philippine Islands, and probably had never seen a Filipino until he landed at Manila. General Smith is now, 1912, one of the judges of the Court of Customs Appeals at Washington. Chapter XXAI. Governor Forbes, 1909-1912. The trouble with this country today is that, under long domination by the protected interests, a partnership has grown up between them and the government which the best men in the Republican Party could not break up if they would. Woodrow Wilson. When Governor Forbes assumed the duties of Governor General of the Philippines, some 10 years after the ratification of the Treaty of Paris whereby we bought the islands, he was the 9th Supreme Representative of American authority we had had there since the American occupation began. The following is the list. 1. John Thomas M. Anderson, June 30, July 25, 1898, 1898. 2. Gen. Wesley Merritt, July 25, 1898, August 29, 1898. 3. Gen. Ilmales Otis Ogg, 29, May 5, 1898, 1900. 4. Gen. Arthur MacArthur, May 5, July 4, 1900, 1901. 5. Hun. William H. Taft, July 4, 1901, December 23, 1903. 6. Hun. Lukey Wright Deck, 23, 1903, November 4, 1905. 7. Hun. Henry C. Hydenove, 4. 1905, September 20, 1906. 8. Hun. James F. Smith Sept, 20, May 7, 1906, 1909. 9. Hun. W. Cameron Forbes, May 7, 1909, 490. No one of these distinguished gentlemen has ever had any authority to tell the Filipinos what we expect ultimately to do with them. They have not known themselves. Is not this
Well, I has got to sign off because of the things behind the things around the things about it. But I'm going to try to get back on as soon as I can. So thanks for tuning in. Lord. Alright. And I'll see you next time. Until next time, it's not going to be next time.